Hi. I hope you've had a good day. Here we are, all of us. Hi, everybody. Some of these are super old friends of mine. This one, he's 30 years old. I think this one is 30 years old too. And this one is 27 years old. And this one is only 5 years old. Because this one came around when my first baby was born, and now he's 30 years old. And this one came around when my baby girl was born, and she's going to be 27 years old. And this one came around when my grandson was born. So today we're going to read The Tale of Squirrel Nutkin. And you may remember that we talked about Squirrel Nutkin just a tiny bit in the Mrs. Tiggy Winkle book when she did the laundry. And she made a comment that she was doing the red coat of Squirrel Nutkin. So let's see what the story of Squirrel Nutkin is all about. There they are, Squirrel Nutkin. This is a tale about a tale. A tale that belonged to a little red squirrel, and his name was Nutkin. He had a brother called Twinkleberry. That is the cutest name. And a great many cousins. They lived in a wood at the edge of a lake. That is the cutest name, Twinkleberry. Now, Mr. Steve at First Church that takes care of our building, he says some things about red squirrels, I think, that maybe they're not so nice. So let's find out if that's the case. Now, here in Pennsylvania where we live, we have lots of squirrels. So the fact that Squirrel Nutkin had a great many cousins does not surprise me, because I have a great many squirrels just in my yard alone. In the middle of the lake, there is an island covered with trees and nut bushes. And amongst those trees stands a hollow oak tree, which is the house of an owl who is called Old Brown. That's a cool name. I like that name, Old Brown. I have a snake in my garden, and I was telling some friends about it, and they said, well, what's your snake's name? And I said, I didn't have a name for it. And they said, well, if you have a pet snake, it should be Jake the snake. So he has become Jake the snake in my garden. But I think if I have an old owl friend, I like the name Old Brown. One autumn, when the nuts were ripe and the leaves on the hazel bushes were golden and green, Nutkin and Twinkleberry and all the other little squirrels came out of the wood and down to the edge of the lake. There are a great many squirrels. I can't wait to show you this picture, what it says. Look at that. Can you imagine? Squirrels making rafts. They made little rafts out of twigs, and they paddled away over the water to Owl Island to gather nuts. Each squirrel had a little sack and a large oar and spread out his tail for a sail. That is very super smart of the squirrels, don't you think? Wow, very inventive. To have their tails act as the sail, really super smart. They also took with them an offering of 3 fat mice as a present for Mr. Old Brown, and put them down upon his doorstep. Then Twinkleberry and the other little squirrels each made a low bow and said politely, "Old Mr. Brown, will you favor us with permission to gather nuts upon your island?" So very formal they were. So very formal. They treat him like a king, don't they? But Nutkin was excessively impertinent in his manners. He bobbed up and down like a little red cherry, singing, riddle me, rote, tote, tote. A little wee man in a red coat, a staff in his hand and a stone in his throat. I'll tell you this riddle if you give me a groat. Such silly words. Now, this riddle is as old as the hills, and Mr. Brown paid no attention whatever to Nutkin. He shut his eyes obstinately and went to sleep. Oh my goodness, such big words. He doesn't want to fool around with the little Nutkin. The squirrels filled their little sacks with nuts and sailed away in the evening. See, their sacks are filled with nuts, and do you see them? Some of them in the background there that are rafting back. I've never seen squirrels doing this. Of course, I don't live on an island. Maybe the squirrels on island that go to islands, maybe they make rafts. But next morning, they all came back again to Owl Island, and Twinkleberry and the others bought a fine fat mole, sort of like a mouse, and laid it on the stone in front of Old Brown's doorway and said, "Mr. Brown, will you favor us with your gracious permission to gather some more nuts?" He does not look like he is in the mood for a riddle. I wonder if Nutkin is going to give him another riddle. But Nutkin, who had no respect, began to dance up and down, tickling Mr. Brown with a nettle and singing, "Oh, Mr. B, riddle me, ree, hitty-pitty within the wall, hitty-pitty without the wall. If you touch hitty-pitty will bite you." So silly. Mr. Brown woke up suddenly and carried the mole into his house. Now, I don't know if Squirrel Nutkin is tickling him with a nettle like any of the nettles that I've ever heard, but I've walked along and come upon nettles that sting, and it doesn't feel good. So if Squirrel Nutkin was using that kind of nettle to tickle Mr. Old Brown, I don't think he would like it. I wouldn't like that on my nose. He shut the door in Nutkin's face. Presently, a little thread of of blue smoke from a wood fire came up from the top of the tree, and Nutkin peeped through the keyhole and sang, "A house full, a hole full, and you cannot gather a bowl full." He sure is good at rhyming, isn't he? I'm terrible at rhyming. Terrible at it. The squirrels searched for nuts all over the island and filled their little sacks. But Nutkin gathered oak apples, yellow and scarlet, and sat upon a beech stump playing marbles and watching the door of old Mr. Brown. Oak apples. I'm not sure what an oak apple is, but they are really small. I wonder if oak apples, it says oak apples, yellow and scarlet. I wonder if that might be acorns. But do squirrels eat acorns? Because they would be more like a ball. But they're kind of a nut. On the third day, the squirrels got up very early and went fishing. They caught 7 fat minnows as a present for old Mr. Brown. They paddled over the lake and landed over a crooked chestnut tree on Owl Island. Oh boy, I love thinking about catching minnows. When we were kids, my dad, well, he still fishes. He still likes to fish. But when we were kids, we would catch minnows for my dad so that he could use them for bait to go fishing. We were very good at catching minnows. We would make bread dough with a little bit of water and a piece of bread and make it just squishy enough, and we would put it on the hook, and we were very good at catching minnows. Very good at it. My dad would pay us like a tiny bit for each minnow. Twinkleberry and 6 other little squirrels each carried a fat minnow. But Nutkin, who had no nice manners, brought no present at all. He ran in front singing, "The man in the wilderness said to me, 'How many strawberries grow in the sea?' I answered him as I thought good, 'As many red herrings as grow in the wood.'" Well, that's a pretty interesting poem. How many strawberries grow in the sea? I don't think any. And he says, as many red herrings grow in the wood. And red herrings are fish. So strawberries don't grow in the ocean, and fish don't grow in the woods. But old Mr. Brown took no interest in riddles, not even when the answer was provided for him. Yes, that's true. That poem, the answer was right there in the poem, or the riddle. On the fourth day, the squirrels brought a present of 6 fat beetles, which were as good as plums in plum pudding for Old Brown. I don't think that's true. Do you think that's true? That beetles are as good as plums? I don't think so. Each beetle was wrapped up carefully in a dock leaf, fastened with a pine needle pin. See the picture? Very creative. But Nutkin sang as rudely as ever. "Old Mr. B, riddle me ree. Flower of England, fruit of Spain, met together in a shower of rain, put in a bag, tied round with string. If you tell me this riddle, I'll give you a ring." Which was ridiculous of Nutkin, because he had not got any ring to give old Mr. Brown. So his riddle is, flower of England, fruit of Spain, met together in a shower of rain. The other squirrels hunted up and down the nut bushes, but Nutkin gathered Robin's pin cushions off a briar bush and stuck them full of pine needle pins. Robin's pin cushions off a briar bush. I think maybe he's just a tiny young squirrel. Everybody else seems to be of the same mind and doing the same thing, but maybe he's just a little bit of the youngest one. On the 5th day, the squirrels brought a present of wild honey. Now, that I can enjoy. It was sweet and sticky. They licked their fingers as they put it down upon the stone. They had stolen it out of a bumblebee's nest on the tippity top of the hill. But Nutkin skipped up and down, singing, hum-a-bum, buzz, buzz, hum-a-bum, buzz. As I went over Tipple-Tine, I met a flock of bonny swine, some yellow-nacked, some yellow-backed. They were the very bonniest swine that e'er went over Tipple-Tine. It's a little bit of a tongue twister trying to say these riddles. Old Mr. Brown turned up his eyes in disgust at the impertinence of Nutkin, but he ate up all the honey. Oh my, he is disgusted with Squirrel Nutkin. I'm afraid that maybe Nutkin's impertinence is going to be get the best of him. The squirrels filled their little sacks with nuts, but Nutkin sat on a big flat rock and played ninepins, or went bowling, with a crab apple and green fir cones. Well, that actually looks kind of fun, doesn't it? Have you ever gone bowling? You have to be pretty good at it. On the sixth day, which was Saturday, the squirrels came again for the last time. They brought a new laid egg in a little rush basket as a last parting present for Old Brown. But Nutkin ran in front, laughing and shouting. Humpty Dumpty lies in the back, with a white counterpane round his neck. 40 doctors and 40 rights cannot put Humpty Dumpty to rights. I know the story of Humpty Dumpty. Do you know that story, Humpty Dumpty? The egg, and he fell, and he broke. Now, old Mr. Brown took an interest in eggs. He opened one eye and shut it again, but still he did not speak. He hasn't said one thing. But the only one that has said anything has been Nutkin, I think. Nutkin became more and more impertinent. Old Mr. B, hickamore, hackamore on the king's kitchen door. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't drive hickamore, hackamore off the king's kitchen door. Nutkin danced up and down like a sunbeam, but still Old Brown said nothing. Some of that story reminds me of the Humpty Dumpty, doesn't it? All the king's horses and all the king's men. Nutkin began again. Arthur O'Bower had broken his band. He comes roaring up the land. The King of Scots with all his power cannot turn Arthur of the Bower. Nutkin made a whirring noise to sound like the wind, and he took a running jump right onto the head of Old Brown. Then, all at once, there was a flutterment and a scufflement and a loud squeak, and the other squirrels scuttered away into the bushes. Oh, Nutkin, I think you have done it. There was no reason to get Mr. Brown so riled up. When they came back, very cautiously, peeping round the tree, there was Old Brown, sitting on the doorstep, quite still with his eyes closed, as if nothing had happened. But Nutkin was in his waistcoat pocket. Oh my goodness, they don't show the picture of that. Oh my goodness, look how Mr. Old Brown is just standing there like nothing happened. Everybody's so nervous. Oh boy. This looks like the end of the story. Not such a good thing. But it isn't the end of the story. Old Brown carried Nutkin into his house. That doesn't sound like a good idea. And held him up by the tail. But Nutkin pulled so very hard that his tail broke in two. And he dashed up the staircase and escaped out the attic window. Uh-oh. His tail broke in two. Can you see he has a short tail now? Up there outside the top of the window. Oh my goodness. And to this day, if you meet Nutkin up a tree and ask him a riddle, he will throw sticks at you and stamp his feet and scold and shout, "Cock-a-cock-a-cock-a-cock!" The end. I think he learned his lesson, don't you? Well, So this is the tale of Squirrel Nutkin. Look at him dancing there on the cover. So we have read about Squirrel Nutkin, and we read about the tale of two bad mice. I love that story. And the tale of Mrs. Tiggy Winkle, and the tale of Peter Rabbit, and the tale of Benjamin Bunny. And we have the tale of Squirrel Nutkin now, and we still have the Tailor of Gloucester and the tale of Mr. Jeremy Fisher. So those will be coming up at some point. So stay tuned. I hope you have a good night. I hope you sleep well. And let us say our prayers, our bedtime prayers. Fold your hands and close your eyes. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. Guide me gently through the night and wake me with the morning light. Amen. I hope you sleep super well.